What for you really defined this visit and the meeting between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping?
That competition will continue, but it will be managed. There's no breakthrough on any of the outstanding issues. They are not comfortable with Iran, sort of charging some kind of toll on movement of cargo, opening up the strait. Chinese are in agreement with Americans there.
This tone of great, deep friendship to, of course, almost humiliating them. But on Xi Jinping, do you find the quintessential Trump quite different?
Xi Jinping retaliated very strongly, and it was Trump who had to blink. And
Donald Trump was apparently, he told reporters that Xi Jinping feels very strongly on Taiwan. He doesn't want to see a movement for independence.
This tension will continue. Chinese are signaling that it's a very sensitive issue for us. Watch developments in Taiwan Strait very carefully. It's not a distant theater for us. The USA is not particularly interested in looking at India as a strategic counterpoise to China. In a way, we are witnessing strategic salience of India going down not only in Washington, D.C., but also in Beijing.
An article that was written by former Foreign Secretary Vijay Gokhale, who actually asked, "Quad whither art thou?"
On top of that, there are signals indicating that USA and India are not on the same wavelength. Always, there will not be a G2 between USA and China. It's very unlikely that will happen. But I have referred to some construct called G2 overlay.
Here's so much of talk, all the way from Silicon Valley to even in India about, that how you need to decouple with China.
We will shift towards lowest common denominator. Now, even lowest common denominator is eluding us.
Hello and a warm welcome to another episode of the Foreign Policy Dialogue. I'm Smita Sharma. This is the platform where we get in some of the finest voices who try and help us understand the biggest diplomatic stories. And this week, of course, all eyes have been on that Trump and Xi Jinping meeting that took place in Beijing, that big reset between the United States and China. And who better to talk about it than retired Ambassador Ashok Kantha, who joins me here. He is a distinguished diplomat. He has served as India's ambassador to China, amongst many, of course, of his other assignments to the Secretary East at the Ministry of External Affairs, close to 4 decades of a career in diplomacy. Also has actually been one of India's lead negotiator for some of the key agreements that India signed with China, has led the Institute of Chinese Studies, has been with the Vivekananda International Foundation too. And Ambassador Kantha is also the Subhash Chandra Bose Chair Professor of International Relations at the Chanakya University in Bengaluru. Many thanks, sir, for finding time to join me here on this podcast. If I could begin by asking you, I'm looking at the bigger headlines after the meeting between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping, some calling it an uneasy truce, somebody saying that this is actually that big reset, that big reset, some saying that there is a lot of uncertainty that still remains. What for you really defined this visit and the meeting between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping?
Smita, I'll not call it a big reset because honestly, the visit largely went along expected lines. We were expecting that, the process of stabilization of relations that commenced at Busan when President Donald Trump met with President Xi Jinping last October, that process will continue. And if you see the signals coming out of the meeting, characterization of the meeting or rather Trump's visit from both sides has been very positive. Xi Jinping called it historic. Trump called it the most successful visit. Xi Jinping also referred to constructive strategic stability between China and the USA, and expressing the hope that it will continue, at least for 3 years and beyond. So he's looking beyond, second term of Donald Trump. He's acknowledging that competition will continue, but it will be managed. There is no breakthrough on any of the outstanding issues. In fact, if you go by the readouts coming from two sides, it's a tale of two readouts, because they seem to be talking about different things. There's so much divergence in terms of topics covered by Chinese Foreign Office, and by the White House readout. But one thing is clear, that both are projecting that relations are today on a relatively even keel, and both sides got what they wanted from the visit. For President Trump, as you know, he's under pressure domestically. His US is embroiled in the Iran war without an easy way out. He wanted to show, a successful foreign visit, and Xi Jinping gave him a lot of, optics. He hosted a banquet, tea, dinner, took him to Temple of Heaven. So in terms of optics, it was high. Likewise, she wanted, a clear message to come out that China is being accepted as a peer nation by the USA. And Donald Trump, his comments were very close to what he said in Busan also, a G2 kind of construct, though one need not take it literally. So both are comfortable. On specifics, one can see that Trump wanted some uh, purchases to be announced by China. China has not made any specific commitments, but reference to 200 Boeings, agriculture produce. Trump claiming that she has shown interest in buying oil from USA to reduce dependence on the Gulf. That is there, but it's really, it doesn't really add up to much. One area where I think both sides had a meeting of mind is how to manage the situation in West Asia or Middle East. Uh, China is also not comfortable with the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, because before this conflict, they were getting 40% of the crude oil through Strait of Hormuz, which has been interrupted now. They are not comfortable with Iran, sort of charging some kind of toll on movement of cargo, but they are circumspect. So their readout does not really reflect claims made in US readout about China being opposed to Iran, going nuclear, or being opposed to militarization in Strait of Hormuz, or making any commitment about not selling arms to Iran. None of that figures. Yet, I believe that there is a certain meeting of minds when it comes to situation in
So,
West
but
Asia.
the White House statement that has been put out, that does say that China did mention that it is against the militarization of the Strait of Hormuz. That, of course, it doesn't want a toll. Now, as you said, that there are two different readouts of the same meeting. But having said that, just a day ago, we also heard of reports of at least 30 Chinese ships being allowed in through what the Iranians have now started calling the Persian Gulf Strait Authority. So is China actually winning on all sides? I mean, here it is talking to Trump saying that I agree with your problems on the Strait of Hormuz, but on Iran, it's also still managing to cut those deals and get its ships out.
See, Smita, I think what we need to understand here, China will not, publicly pressurize Iran. They're aware that for Iran, it's an existential issue. So, though China has some leverage, it's not limitless. So they'll be cautious. Yet, as I mentioned, some of the things which Americans mentioned, for instance, non-militarization of Strait of Hormuz, or opening up the strait, Chinese are in agreement with Americans there.
Also, coming back to that meeting again, and you actually laid down a very broad sort of a overlay of the talks, and I'm going to pick up some threads of this conversation. But before that, I mean, Donald Trump has a certain quintessential style when he deals with world leaders that oscillates between, this tone of great deep friendship to, of course, almost humiliating them. But on Xi Jinping, do you find the quintessential Trump quite different? I mean, cons- consistently telling him that how much he respects him, how much he's a great leader. Is it aligning with the Trump style, or you do find him more reverential to Xi compared to even his European allies and the other world leaders?
Compared to European allies, clearly is far more, deferential to Xi Jinping. European allies, he does humiliate from time to time. What we need to take note of here, that USA acknowledges that equation between Washington DC and Beijing had changed. And last year, when Trump, piled on, tariffs on imports from China, went up to 145% at one point of time, uh, Xi Jinping retaliated very strongly. And it was Trump who had to blink. And since then, in fact, one can see that uh, Americans have been cautious. There was a story in Wall Street Journal some time ago that a message has gone out from White House that none of the departments should do anything which will cause offense to China. So they have been, very, very careful about, Chinese sensitivities. If you look at issues which do not figure in readouts coming from either side, that's also a very interesting list. There is no reference to any of the structural problems in Chinese economy, things like overcapacity or its, uh, mercantilist behavior, even issues like critical minerals or export control. They do not figure in any of the readouts. Equally important, when the meeting commenced on 14th, and while media was still present in the meeting room, Xi Jinping decided to foreground, a couple of issues. One, of course, he talked about Thucydides trap. That's his favorite, but that also shows that acknowledgement. It's China which is the rising power, and USA should accept it. More important was the way he framed Taiwan issue. He decided to publicly refer to Taiwan, going to the extent of saying that if this issue is not handled properly, there might be conflict between USA and China. Very, very firm public message was sent out. Uh, we don't have details because this issue was not referred to at all in US readout. Chinese readout talks about in some detail. There's no reference to whether arms sales from USA to Taiwan was discussed, though Marco Rubio mentioned that it did figure. There again, interesting thing is that Trump has publicly stated that he has been, consulting Xi Jinping on this issue. That goes directly against six assurances which were given by the USA to Taiwan. One of the assurances was that, USA will not consult PRC when it comes to selling arms to Taiwan. Of course, these niceties are not important for Trump. Bottom line is that today, it's clearly, if you look at US-China equation, uh, it's China which has the upper hand, and China is aware of that. Uh, both sides are buying time. Both sides realize that the strategic competition is continuing. Uh, the, the formal Chinese position remains that US wants to contain China, slow down its rise. That hasn't changed. US national, strategic, there's NSS and defense strategy, it has gone change where no longer there is a focus on China as a strategic rival. But bottom line is that strategic rivalry is baked in the system on both sides. It's not going away. But for the time being, both sides are happy, maintaining stability in the relationship.
So, coming back again to that Taiwan question that you just spoke about, clearly Xi Jinping drawing the red lines. And in fact, on his way back on US Air Force One, Donald Trump was apparently, he told reporters that Xi Jinping feels very strongly on Taiwan. He doesn't want to see a movement for independence. And he simply said, when asked about that, how did he react? He simply said, I made no comments. I made no commitments either way. Let's see what happens.
I talked a lot about Taiwan. He thinks they cannot have anything to do with what they're doing. I mean, he's against very much what they're doing. We talked about Taiwan. We talked about Iran a lot. And I think we have a very good understanding with both. On Taiwan, he does not want to see a fight for independence because that would be a very strong confrontation. And I heard him out.
Are you going to change your wording?
No, I didn't make a comment on it. I heard him out. I have a lot of respect for him. On Iran, it's very interesting. He feels strongly they can't have a nuclear weapon. He said that very strongly. They cannot have a nuclear weapon, and he wants them to open up the strait. But as he said, they closed it, and then you closed them with a smile. And it's true. We control the strait. And they've done no business, literally they've done no business in the last 2.5 weeks, which is approximately $500 million a day. So we're doing very well on all fronts.
So where does that really leave the Taiwan question? And also, what does it mean for countries like India when it comes to our dynamics with Taiwan amid this US-China sort of a, not a reset, but yes, a reworking relationship?
On Taiwan, there was speculation earlier that Chinese will try to persuade Trump to come out with some formulation like the USA is opposed to independence of Taiwan. That was, to my mind, not likely to happen. And Trump is right when he says that he didn't make any commitment. Nothing. Even Chinese have not claimed that Trump made any commitment on Taiwan issue. So Taiwan essentially, this tension will continue. Chinese are signaling that it's a very sensitive issue for us. So don't, sort of in any way upgrade your engagement with Taiwan. They're signaling on arms sale also. But Trump may ignore that. Will not be surprised if he does that. So Taiwan, for the time being, I expect China will persist with its policy of stepping up military and economic coercion, its so-called gray zone operation, while at the same time reaching out to KMT, as you saw recently when KMT chairperson was visiting China, expecting that in next elections, KMT will return to power, which will give more room for maneuver to both Beijing and Taipei. As far as we are concerned, of course, we have to watch developments in Taiwan Strait very carefully. It's not a distant theater for us because what happens there has very direct implications for India. But for me, there is a sobering message which is coming across from the current dynamics in US-China relations. And that message is that both USA and China, notwithstanding very significant structural differences between them, are keen to project stability in the relationship. And USA is not particularly interested in looking at India as a strategic counterpoise to China. In a way, we are witnessing a strategic salience of India going down not only in Washington, D.C., but also in Beijing. So we are in a difficult situation. I've been arguing that we are faced with a strategic squeeze, something which requires some really fresh thinking on our part.
And yes, you have indeed, minced no words in a couple of your recent articles on the subject. Must read for all our viewers. I'll be providing some of the links to your recent articles. You can go and check them out in the description box. But continuing with that thought, sir, this the kind of rebalance in the Indo-Pacific that we saw starting from the Obama administration of India being the strategic counterweight to China in the Indo-Pacific. But the recent events, whether it was a US submarine, a torpedo blowing up Iris Dana in what India considers its strategic backyard, a very important Indian Ocean region where we think that we are the net security providers, we claim to do so. And then, of course, to this meeting between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping. And there was an article that was written by former Foreign Secretary Vijay Gokhale, who actually asked, Quad, whither art thou? So what really happens to that quadrilateral framework? We have a meeting coming up of the foreign ministers later in the month.
There are several, developments which should cause concern to us. I've already referred to the fact that how, strategic significance or salience of India has gone down, both in Washington, D.C. and Beijing. Vijay has talked about Quad in his article in the Times of India today. I fully agree with him. In fact, it's not for us to answer questions on Quad. We are not clear about commitment of the USA to Quad any longer. I've been arguing that we should seriously revisit the whole construct of external balancing of China, because the signals do not suggest that USA will step in. You have seen how national security strategy in the primary theater moved from Indo-Pacific to Western Hemisphere. You have seen how today USA is fully embroiled in not only just Iran, but the wider Gulf region, shifting defense resources from Indo-Pacific to the Gulf. So any pivot to Indo-Pacific, long promised, is unlikely to materialize anytime soon. On top of that, there are signals indicating that USA and India are not on the same wavelength on a whole lot of issues in our neighborhood. You referred to how the Iranian frigate was torpedoed. It was returning from Milan series of exercise hosted by us, and the way it was young sailors, they've just perished. Then you have seen developments in US-Pakistan relations, US insensitivity towards India. You have seen developments relating to US policy in Bangladesh, elsewhere, and broader, I referred to earlier, change in US policy towards both China and India. Negative signals which have come. All these need to be taken note of by us. That's why I suggested earlier, what we need today is going back to drawing board and taking a fresh look at many of the earlier assumptions we had, because those assumptions may not hold valid any longer. And Vijay Gokhale has referred to one of the assumptions, salience of Quad. Is it really working for us? Let Americans convince us of that, rather than are doing any running on account of Quad. If Mr. Trump is not even willing to come to India for Quad summit, why should we show any excessive anxiety about Quad, sort of chugging along when it's not?
So, You've raised some very, very valid concerns, sir. But also, what do you think right now is the thought process within Japan and South Korea when they are looking at this meeting?
Uh, well, I don't think there are any surprises either for Tokyo or Seoul. Uh, they watch, you know, developments in U.S.-China relations very carefully. If I wasn't surprised by any of developments taking place in Beijing during President Trump's visit, I don't think Japanese and Koreans are surprised either. But they're not comfortable with many of the trends they have witnessed, including always, there will not be a G2 between USA and China. It's very unlikely that will happen. But I have referred to some construct called G2 overlay, a perception that USA and China are working together. That itself, reduces space for maneuver available to countries like India, Japan, Korea. So that's happening. We have to keep an eye on that. I understand Japanese wanted Trump to make a transit halt in Japan, which he didn't do. He could have stopped in Japan for refueling rather than in Anchorage, Alaska. But he didn't want to know. I think anyway, kind of distract
I'm
from
sure the
important.
Alaskans would have also wanted for him to be in Japan rather than in Alaska. But yes. But when you say that, of course, it reduces the maneuvering space, be it, of course, for Japan, South Korea, or India. I'm just trying to be a little optimistic here. Does it reduce maybe some of the burden on the side of supply chain conflicts for the world? Is there a larger good when Mr. Xi Jinping, of course, there are words like this that he has also uttered for India in the past, when he tells the US that we should be partners and not rivals? Is there some larger good that also comes out of this for the world? I'm just trying to be hopeful.
Smita, I don't think when it comes to supply chain challenges, they're going to go away in any way as a result of this visit. Because what we have witnessed is weaponization of dependencies. I'll not call it interdependency because mostly it's dependency by both Washington DC and Beijing, and they're aware of. Beijing is aware of trump card they have. They have put in place, extensive mechanisms for utilizing, including new security laws which were adopted in March and April. At Busan, they had just put on hold implementation of some very sort of restrictive, regulations they had crafted, but they remain valid. So they can be operationalized anytime. So I don't think we will get any happiness because of supply chain anxieties going away. That will not happen. In fact, I've been arguing that we should look at dual and differential de-risking vis-a-vis both China and the USA. Dual because both of them have in recent past and earlier too really use economic means to pressurize us. Leveraged dependencies we have on them. Access to US market leading to reciprocal tariffs, penal tariffs because of a purchase of oil from Russia, and China likewise denying us a whole lot of products including rare earth magnets. So we are aware. So in case of China, it will have to be far more systematic and extensive because given nature of our relationship with that country. With USA, it will have to be more bounded, more carefully crafted, but while trying to reduce dependencies on China, which is going to be very difficult, we should not end up creating new dependencies on USA, which has proven established track record of using those levers against various countries, including India.
So, of course, this is a conversation that I can keep going on and on with, but I'll just have the last two questions. I mean, if you just rewind the clock a few years ago in the pandemic years, whether it was the Trump first administration, the Joe Biden administration, the pandemic years, so much of talk, all the way from Silicon Valley to even in India about, that how you need to decouple with China. That was the entire essence of the US administration tone and tenor, that decoupling has to happen. And now you come to this moment when Donald Trump actually lands up in Beijing with an entire army of top US CEOs, including, of course, Elon Musk, people from Apple, Nvidia, the who's who of the technology world. So where does that decoupling theory and assertion really stand? And what do you see in terms of the technology partnership today between US and China, keeping in mind that US actually accused China of an industrial scale stealing attempt of its AI technology?
Decoupling was never a possibility, given kind of interlinkages two of the largest economies in the world, USA and China have. They cannot possibly decouple from each other. So there was this concept of de-risking which came into play, and some attempts were made to deny certain high-tech items like semiconductors or equipment for fabricating semiconductors to China. To some extent, those export controls are still in position, but Trump in parallel is also exploring why can't we sell more chips to China. Maybe we'll not sell the most advanced. So you would have noticed Jensen Huang, Nvidia head, was also part of the group. So there will be de-risking in technology domain. I believe that competition will continue. It will be a fairly, sort of strong competition. In artificial intelligence, it's a universe which is dominated today by two countries, the USA and China. And there is reluctance in USA to sort of partner with China in any way. So in fact, when they sort of engage with us in AI domain, one of the expectations is that our AI ecosystem will be China free. So I expect that will continue. There was no discussion this time, at least going by readouts, on artificial intelligence, though US Treasury Secretary later mentioned that there will be talks on this issue later, and talks will happen because USA is still ahead in AI compared to China. Otherwise, Chinese would not be interested in a dialogue with USA. So we should be clear that technology, we may have a fractured, sort of ecosystem where USA and China will remain very serious rivals, because technology increasingly will be the primary determinant of which country will pull ahead in this strategic rivalry which is taking place. But they will also continue to cooperate in certain areas of technology. So it's not really, either or situation.
It's not a zero-sum game out there. Just a final question, sir. When it comes to the regional groupings, whether it's BRICS, where we are seeing so much of divisions today, with Iran and UAE exchanging sharp jibes, no consensus really in terms of the outcome document in a year when India is chairing this summit meeting, later in the year, of course. And then you also have SCO. So these regional groupings, the non-Western US powers, where Russia, China are aligned in a certain way, India seems to be aligned in a very different way today with the choices it is making, whether it is about proximity to Israel, proximity to UAE. What do you see as the relevance and significance of these regional groupings? Do you see it growing? Do you see an RIC getting revived, for instance, that a Sergei Lavrov is talking about, that Russia, India, China come back together? Or will it only be limited to optics?
These regional groupings, be it BRICS or SCO or even Quad, they have a very limited value. In a way, actually, BRICS has been most productive because it could come up with proposition like New Development Bank, which was incidentally an idea Dr. Manmohan Singh proposed in the first instance, but it happens to be headquartered in Shanghai, China, though we are equal equity holder there. It's progressed quite well. But BRICS efficacy as a plurilateral platform, in fact, got reduced once it was expanded. At that time, a lot of people expressed concern that it will become an instrument of a geopolitical instrument sort of used by China. Some of us had said that actually what will happen that it will find more and more difficult to arrive at common positions. So we will shift towards lowest common denominator. Now, even lowest common denominator is eluding us, as you saw during recent meetings, because there are too many contradictions among member countries which have come to the fore, especially after Iran war. SCO has its limitations. We discussed earlier. Quad also has limitations. RIC, honestly, was never a very effective platform. This is one area where it's often said that if it's a triangle, one leg of the triangle is much shorter than other two legs. That is, India-China relationship compared to our relations with Russia and China's relations with Russia. And very often I've been involved in both track 1 and track 2 discussions in RIC platforms. I didn't really come across this grouping coming up with any substantive ideas which really add value to our foreign policy. So good to know it's a talk shop. I don't think we should be in a hurry to revive foreign minister level meetings of RIC. I think Dr. Jaishankar has held back so far. I think that's a sensible position to take. Certainly not much point in reviving it at summit level anytime soon.
Okay, I think those were some very sharp insights, and appreciate, like always. Before I end, sir, because you are also a fluent speaker, writer of Mandarin, you follow the newspapers there very closely. Anything interesting that you've read recently that you would like to share with our viewers, or maybe some book suggestion for our young viewers?
Well, one book I'll suggest is one I edited, in fact.
Yes.
It's Decoding China, Art Perspectives from India. It's a serious book where 21 scholars and practitioners from India, they get together and they offer fairly sort of database, fact-based assessments of China. What I'll say that when it comes to China's policies today, they are in a more confident position compared to what obtained, say, end of 2024. At that time, they were really concerned about what Donald Trump will do, and the economy was under a lot of pressure. Even now, economy is under pressure. But in geopolitical terms, they think they have an upper hand. In trade and tariff negotiations, they believe they stare down the Americans. And they could do that without yielding any space on hardcore issues like Chinese economy. Earlier there was pressure from the West from USA on issues like overcapacity or China's behavior as a trade partner. I think those issues have subsided today. So Chinese have managed to arrive at a new equation with Washington, D.C., which is somewhat more favorable to them without making any policy concessions. They have been able to do so because they had invested in capacities, they had invested in developing leverage, and they had prepared very extensively, especially since 2018, when they didn't know how to deal with the first round of Trump tariffs, so first Trump administration. Compared to that situation, they are much better prepared. And we have also seen that the fallout of Iran conflict, while Chinese are hurting, no doubt about it, but compared to others, they are much better placed because they had diversified their, sources of crude supply. They had gone for electrification economy on an unprecedented scale in renewables. They are by far the leaders in the world. So they are relatively well placed. Also, one last point I'll make. Iran war has accelerated the transition which was taking place from petro-state to electro-state. USA is doubling down as a petro-state, drill baby drill of Donald Trump. Chinese put their bets on a movement towards green energy, renewable sector, and they are reaping rich harvest today.
I think those are very, very important lessons for all of us to learn, whether you consider China your friend, your enemy, your adversary, or your frenemy. But I really enjoyed this conversation, and thank you so much, Ambassador Kantha, for patiently answering all questions. I hope to have you. I hope to have you back for another episode in Hindi, because a large section of our audiences are actually from the Hindi-speaking regions too. So, but thank you so much for now for joining us here.
Thank you, Smita. Thanks for inviting me.
That's all that we have on this episode of the Foreign Policy Dialogue. Make sure to check out the previous episodes of the podcast. And if you like the content, do share, subscribe to the channel, and press the bell icon notification for fresh content alert. That's a goodbye from me here on the show. Thanks for watching.